Welcome to the Market Maven podcast. I'm Sarah Dylan Jensen, Farmers Market Director and Champion for Small Business Owners. Each episode, I dive deep into the stories of entrepreneurs, exploring their struggles, celebrating their wins, and sharing the real, unfiltered journey of building a business. Intermixed are the stories, setbacks, and successes that I've experienced along the roller coaster ride of owning a business for the last 10 plus years. Whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur, a seasoned pro, or just love hearing inspiring stories, this is your place. Hey everyone, it's Sarah, your Market Maven, trying something a little bit different here today with Red Truck Studio. I'm super excited to do a video podcast recording. I do want to just talk about a lot that's been going on recently. I've been dropping teasers. You've caught glimpses of it in some recent episodes, but really this is just to address essentially the energy, all of the community threads, the political debates, the hype, the comment section, all of that kind of stuff, and acknowledging some of the irony of the engagement that has been happening online on the Lake Stevens community groups, and beyond that too. I'm going to touch on some things beyond that, but so little turnout when it actually counts, like at our farmers markets. So this episode is to tell the truth and the lived experience that I have had over the last 6 to 8 months and even the last 6 years with the Lake Stevens Farmers Market, connect the dots and really push for change, either for the next person that takes this on, for myself going forward, and then just the continuation of farmers markets and small businesses in general. So I want to kick it off with a little bit of backstory about the Lake Stevens Farmers Market. So there has been a lot of noise online, and this is my time to talk about the truth of what's happened and talk about what's really going on here in Lake Stevens and our local communities in general. Because it's not just about a market. This is about small businesses. It's about small business owners. And it's about what happens when leadership stops listening to us and communities get tired. I would like to touch on the background of the Lake Stevens Farmers Market as a whole. Back in early 2020, pre COVID, I was approached by the city of Lake Stevens to attempt a farmers market in town. They had had one previously, and I believe it was run by a volunteer organization, which I commend to no end because it's a lot of work and people should be paid for their work. They had seen the success of the Snohomish Farmers Market and heard about me, which has happened before with Stanwood as well. And so I decided to pursue that and go to a few city council meetings, have a couple of conversations with the mayor and different council members and city staff. So we adopted that we were going to do a request for proposal. They were going to, I was going to respond to it. And I believe I was the only person that did, but because of public, all of the city civic stuff, they have to publish it. I responded as I do in my type A, straight A personality with a 15-page proposal for the market based off of some of the experience I had had with Snohomish and Stanwood. And lo and behold, we decided to start a market. Of course, as you know, 2020 in the spring, COVID hit. And I was very thankful for the city to want to pursue the farmers market despite all of the unknowns around COVID. And given that nature, I was allowed to pretty much kind of have my way with things. We did our best to continue with masking rules and those types of things, but it was very obvious that the community really wanted a farmers market. We did a little bit of polling on social media when I got the social media page up and running on what day would work best. And at the time, a Wednesday evening worked best for myself because I didn't have any other markets. And it worked good for the community because so many people were working from home at that point in time. The first year was super successful. We had a lot of great turnout. We did a harvest market, we did a Christmas market, and I just felt the love from this community. It was absolutely amazing. Then over the next 16 to 18 months, the market was still seemingly thriving, but folks were starting to go back to work. And I realized that Wednesdays were becoming more difficult, but Snohomish Thursdays and Stanwood Fridays were working just fine. So I thought that the community would prevail. Now, alongside the market, there was this whole development of North Cove Park, and it's a beautiful space, and there was continuing projects in different phases. The phases were something that we were trying to work around as the market. And when I say we, I actually mean me because it's just me behind the scenes. And what happened was we consistently had to kind of adjust our footprint for these various construction projects. And my vendors were super amazing. They were compliable, they did their best, and we did our best. I did my best to make sure this market ended up continuing to thrive. As the park became more well known and more used, we had an influx of teenagers after school coming by, throughout the summer coming by. Anybody that lives in Lake Stevens know that sometimes the teenagers are not always on their best behavior. And we started noticing some more issues with the local youth, either bullying. I actually caught some teens open drinking out of fifths of alcohol a few times, which is always fun. And then defying authority in myself to say, like, you can't actually do that, or even just trying to give them a hint of, like, do better. We all behaved as we did when we were teenagers. But then that started to translate into theft from vendors, into kids riding their skateboards and things like that around vendor booths, potentially like causing damage. And the city's response was just, we can only do so much, which I fully understand. The customer attendance started to go down a little bit more as well. And we saw our summers getting a little bit hotter and a little bit warmer and um, a little bit more just hard to bear, some of those heat days in the height of summer. We're also up against, a lot of other events coming back into play after COVID and after some of those restrictions were lifted. So that was also a struggle. I'd say by our third year out of 6 total, started seeing customers not coming in as much, and the complaints around the teens and the bad behavior and the parking. Parking is always an issue when you have a farmer's market in a small town. It has consistently been an issue in my 11 years at Snohomish as well. And somehow people find a way. They figure it out. They walk a few blocks. And so I was constantly coming up with suggestions and solutions for people, talking to other local business owners, seeing if we could use some extra parking if they didn't have their business open. But that essentially just kind of became the start of the downfall for the market. Even though the city still wanted it, I still wanted to keep doing it, and I just figured we would get through this kind of hump. Fast forward to this year, and when I sat down and actually did the math in the contract that, yes, I agreed to on payments for the city to use the space compared to what I had experienced with other markets, I realized that I had paid the city of Lake Stevens almost $100,000 for 6 years of utilizing a space that I was told, and our community has been told, was specifically for farmers markets, festivals, and events. North Cove Park in the city of Lake Stevens has a large grassy area. They have a few pavilions for picnics and private rentals. There's a park that was built as part of one of the phases that was a little bit away from where the farmers market area sits. And then there is, of course, the mill and Festival Street, which were the two biggest components of that area. Festival Street was to be used for festivals, Aquafest, farmers market, and anything else that somebody might want to actually rent the facilities for. I haven't seen too much else go there. There's been a health and wellness fair. There's been a couple of regattas for the Lake Stevens Rowing Club, which have been really cool and really well attended. The mill itself is essentially like what our Snohomish Carnegie is. It's a venue, and it is a very pliable venue. So it can be used for a celebration of life. It can be used for a birthday party, wedding, a gathering. I've been to several networking events there. I think the chamber has used it a couple of times, but it also proves to be quite expensive to rent for a single entity or a single business. The city of Lake Stevens always wanted me to use the mill as part of the farmers market, which was welcome because having some vendors inside out of those hot days and things like that with products that could melt, or just needing to be outside of the sun and not be under a hot tent. They encouraged me to use that so that it was great marketing for people to want to rent it at other times. And we constantly had people coming into the mill and asking about, how do I rent this? This is really cool, and kind of just taking self tours of it. I believe at certain points in time as well, people would come in and arrange a time with the city staff to do a tour while on site. So when we fast forward to this year, I said in order to reduce costs, as I was talking about earlier, that $100,000 price tag, um, I said maybe we don't use the mill. Maybe if that's one of the biggest cost drivers in this contract, that maybe we withdraw from that. I was told, absolutely, we want you to still use the mill. There is some cost associated with taking care of the bathrooms, that kind of stuff, emptying the trash, all of which I offered to do as myself, or if I was able to hire staff to do that. So the city very much encouraged us to keep using the mill because it was essentially advertising for them. So that's what we did. We had some vendors that always liked being in there, so why change something if it's not broke, let's not fix it. When I did bring this up, all of this in this conversation early on for the 2025 market season, talking about the use of the mill, the use of the space, comparing it to the areas that I also do farmers markets in and how nobody charges this much money to use these types of spaces, especially for events that really drive community, that are focused on helping support small businesses and farmers, as well as providing food access. The conversation got a little bit more difficult. I entered into essentially negotiations. It was like a pitch, then the rebuttal, then standing my ground. And then we finally ended up agreeing to something that was better than the previous 5 years, but still was going to cost my business a lot of money to run a market there. What I noticed as soon as that essentially happened and the paperwork was signed was that the support wasn't as communal as it had been in years past. But you know what? It's my show and it's on me to do the market to the best of my ability. I was able to hire a staff person who had helped me since 2020, either in a volunteer role or filling in when I was on vacation. And she agreed that she would take care of day of market operations for me because, of course, in all of this, we find out that my mom is sick with cancer and I am going to be a primary caregiver for this year. And hopefully no longer than that. Hopefully everything goes well. But it's a lot for any one person to handle, as well as having a small business, as well as being an employee for the Snohomish Farmers Market, all of these things. So I was super thankful to have somebody. So not only was the city not quite as communal and friendly, I mean, all emails and the Zoom calls we got on, it was definitely fairly similar to what I experienced before, but there was just a slight shift in the mood. I did also show up to a few of the coffees with the mayor, one of those, community invites where he sits down at a Starbucks for a couple of hours and talks. And I just reiterated some of the concerns that I had about going forward with this contract. I'm the one doing all the work behind the scenes. I'm doing the graphic design, the website, the marketing. I'm putting my name on the contracts for our Snap Ed and our Pop Club and all of those different types of things. And I was hoping for more support this year around crime at the park, teenage behavior at the park, parking solutions, those types of things. And what I got was a lot of what you might expect from a politician of, yes, I'll take that down. Yes, we'll take care of that. Yep, totally fine, no problem. And I realized that any politician might be that way. And my relationship with the mayor had always been good despite having political differences in my, core values and things like that. We'd always worked pretty well together. So I felt like I had been heard, walked away from that. Then we get to opening day of the farmers market, where there had previously been some construction that had been planned. It was supposed to be completed by the start of the farmers market. And again, like I touched on earlier, we've been dealing with construction at this farmers market for many years, pretty much since its inception. I think 2020 was the only year we didn't actually have construction there. So we have pivoted, which is my least favorite word in the entire dictionary. We've pivoted over and over and over, and we have complied over and over and over. So imagine my surprise when I show up on opening day and construction is 100% nowhere near complete. I was just shocked, honestly, and so overwhelmingly angry that I had to take a moment in my car to just like sit there and scream because the road is all torn up. All of the things that I have told my vendors about how to load in and how to do this are all up in the air, and I have no way to communicate that with them a mere hours before we're supposed to open at 3 o'clock. So my staff, myself, we pivot and we do our absolute best to just get everybody into their spaces. The construction workers were pretty awful as well. They were obviously not abreast of this whole situation of a farmer's market happening. In which case, a lot of people don't understand that we set up 4 to 5 to 6 hours before the market starts because it takes that long to get 100 vehicles in and out. It takes that long to have vendors unload their cars and walk their stuff over to spaces and all that kind of stuff. We're also taking away some access points. So where they thought they only had to walk, a couple 100 feet, they're now having to walk a quarter of a mile to get their stuff to their location. And we're just trying to help as best as possible. So naturally, my first response is to call the city and call my contacts at staff and say, hey, what is going on with this? This is not what we talked about. My answer was, yeah, it's construction. It's going over. They hope to be wrapped up soon, but it is just what it is. We can't control it. I don't know the whole background of the contracts they had, but I know that this wasn't necessarily city workers doing the construction. So I just want to make sure that that's super, super clear. It was a contract for a project. Um, Week after week, essentially, of the farmer's market, we were met with construction, and it didn't end. It didn't end there. It didn't end the second week, the third week, the fourth week, or even our 13th and final week of the Lake Stevens Farmers Market official summer season. It was still even going on just last month when I drove down there to return some keys. So this is an extremely frustrating situation for somebody that is in a contract agreement with the city of Lake Stevens, and to just have it be completely absent of actual agreement. So I did go to another coffee with the mayor and expressed my sincere concerns for how this had been handled. And once again, it was apology, which I super appreciated. But also, I got the statement, and I'll remember this until the day I die, of him just saying, to be honest with you, we all just kind of forgot about the farmer's market. And I looked right at him in his eyes and said, well, that just kind of sucks because how do you forget about something that really drives a city and a community and brings everybody together that we have had a relationship with for the last 6 years? So at that point, I kind of knew that there had been a wall put up, and I don't know if that was because of the financial situation with me paying less to the city. I don't know if it was true that they all just kind of forgot about it. Either way, as a small business owner and somebody that has poured my heart and soul into this market and gone through a pandemic with it and gone through the vitriol that happens on a community group, that I was done. And so all of my attitude going forward from then on was very much done. It was to support my vendors as best as possible. But naturally, week after week, as they're continuing to go through this construction zone, and every single week it's different, and we're starting to get damage to vendors' vehicles. We're having construction workers swear at vendors loading in, at my staff when they were there, at customers even trying to cross the road. You can imagine that people were coming less and less to support the market. Vendors were calling out more and more. And where we had about 100 vendors on opening day, our last and final day in August, we had 38 vendors. So the measurables are there to see the impact that this had on a farmer's market overall. So, in the midst of all of this season and trying to keep the positive attitude, at least on the surface value of our Facebook page and social media, and trying to keep encouraging vendors, that becomes really hard to keep morale up when the entire office is failing or flooding with water. I did do a video. I finally just bit the bullet and did a video on our Facebook page, really urging the community to continue coming out to acknowledge and hear their frustrations with the downtown area, but also remind them of what their support means to these small businesses when they can show up and they make that effort and suffer minor convenient inconveniences to be able to come. I always liken this situation, especially at any farmer's market, Snohomish, Stanwood, parking is always a bear. I think any of these wonderful areas to travel to and to visit, parking is always going to be a headache. So, what do we do when we go to Costco on a Saturday and we want to get our coffee and our creamer and our eggs and that kind of stuff? We park and we walk. And then you walk through that whole warehouse and you get your steps and you're excited about it. I'm not sure in the translation of things why that doesn't translate to downtown Snohomish or to the Snohomish Farmers Market or the Lake Stevens Farmers Market. I don't understand why the minor inconvenience becomes such a major inconvenience when we're talking about farmers markets. I digress a little bit. However, that's just my little soapbox on parking. We can suffer through minor inconveniences for the things that we want to attain and get to and shop from. So I did this video, and I believe that was just before my secondary coffee with the mayor, where I was very disheartened by. And he let me know in that conversation that he was upset with my video. And that video was nothing like what this is. So that video was really encouraging community. It was letting the community know that we don't control the construction, that I don't work for the city necessarily. And so, please don't be angry at me. And I've had to do a couple of these before, especially during COVID with masking and that kind of stuff. So I was really just trying to be heartfelt, honest, and reach the community in a different way. That video got over 22,000 views, which was absolutely incredible, but obviously also put me on the radar for the city. And when you speak up in that type of a situation, in this type of a situation, you put a target on your back. And that's exactly what happened. Towards the end of the Lake Stevens Farmers Market summer season, I started getting emails that were asking me questions that were a little bit questionable, for lack of a better word, of just how many vendors did you have on XYZ day? Or can you please provide the report? Now, I did some travel towards the end of that market season and I wasn't in town. I had my out of office on, but I always tried to respond as best and as quickly as possible. I'll be back. I'll take care of that. There was definitely one payment that I was late on, but really, it's not like I'm not going to pay. And I was out of town. And so I took care of it as soon as I got back. Then the emails started coming in of, per XYZ RCW of your contract, we're enacting this ability to audit you and your small business to verify records that you have given us about the farmer's market. My contract, to be fully transparent, is that I pay the city per attending vendor, and then I pay the city per approved application. Both of those are up to my discretion as far as how I lay out the market, who I approve, who I don't approve, and who attends each week. But essentially, that amounts to and has amounted to anywhere between $800 and $2,000 per week for the city in previous contracts. And this year, because we renegotiated and I paid them less after evaluating my expenses. Um, so that was equating to anywhere between $300 and $700 per week. And as the attendance, like I noted before, started to decline, obviously those payments would be declining. So that wasn't good enough for the city. The reports that I have always given them, the same type of report, I think I changed the format a little bit this year just to make it more simplified. That obviously got through to them as something that was not accurate. And so an audit was initiated on my business. I continued to provide the same types of reports to stand my ground and say that the records I have given you are what's truthful. But that wasn't good enough for the certain city staff member that I had been working with. And so she started making phone calls to vendors. She gathered that information from the website where we have a vendor directory. She was utilizing that to reach out to vendors directly and actually verify if they attended on certain days or if I was being truthful about their attendance or non attendance. Now, to be a little bit more explanatory about how market managers do their jobs, we put together a market map based on people that have applied for that specific day. And we put it together, we create a vendor mix, and there's a whole flow. There's a lot more that goes into it than just like plugging people into stalls and, a free for all. So, what happened over the course of the season in Lake Stevens was that vendors would not show up. I had vendors call out day of because of, heat or because of smoky air or any of those types of things. And then I had vendors that would be stopped and waiting for 20, 30, 45 minutes to try and get to the market area and just get fed up and go home and consider it a wash for the day. They just had zero patience left, especially by the end of the season. So those numbers were very accurate. 100 to start the season on any given Wednesday, and then 38 at the end of the season because they were just also exhausted. And they're also humans dealing with their own sets of issues, illnesses, all of those types of things. So back to the audit, I continued to provide the same level of resources that I had been giving this staff person, and it just wasn't good enough. She decided to call the software company that I pay for to manage the farmers market, the application process, the vendor map, the integration with the website, all of that kind of stuff. And she decided to ask if I was being truthful in the types of reporting that she was getting. She wanted unaggregated reporting. Unaggregating isn't telling the story of what happens on market day. It's not telling the story of the 17 text messages I get of vendors dropping out, or the emails that I'm getting, or somebody showing up and being so upset by the experience they had with a construction worker that they decided to just up and leave. So I'm not responsible for to pay the city for any of those vendors and any of those situations. So I did what she asked and pulled the report unaggregated, aside from vendors' direct contact information, like their addresses. That's not important here. And continued to fight with her about how this information is truthful. It's not telling the whole story. The whole story is told in the report that I gave you. Finally, I got a threat that was essentially if I didn't give the report and a check for something like $1,300 by the end of the day on a Wednesday, that they would consider me in violation. I'm also hearing at the same time as this, people reaching out to me on Facebook, asking what's wrong, seeing some of the videos, seeing some of my stuff that they follow on the Market Maven. And one message in particular was pretty shocking to me. It was somebody letting me know that the mayor had requested a meeting with them and the Lake Stevens Chamber to find out about if they wanted to take over the harvest market. She asked me, "Aren't you doing the harvest market?" Which happens to be this coming weekend. And I said, "Yes." She goes, "Isn't that in your contract?" And I said, "Yes." And she goes, "Well, it seems very strange that they would ask us to take it over." Mind you, all of the work had been done for this market. All of the applications had been processed. All of the payments had been made. So I also didn't see how this was going to work. Thankfully, I think after that meeting, the chamber declined, maybe because they realized that they were probably going to be in some sort of a legal battle, because I definitely would pursue that. But all of this just paints the story of how when somebody speaks up about being mistreated by a city organization, that problems are continued to be made for this person, me, I'm talking about me. I'm the problem, it's me. Um, Problems are put forth and scare tactics are made, threats about money and those types of things. Now, again, full transparency, I did go back and look at my spreadsheet and I did miss one line. So I did owe the city $125, which I have since paid with check by the deadline. Um, but it just puts this big target on my back. And I am very, very afraid. I'm afraid for even this podcast. I'm afraid for this getting out in some sort of legal action. I don't know what it could be, but this is the example of what I want to showcase can happen behind the scenes and that there's a lot more to every story. Since then, there has been a Facebook post in a Lake Stevens community page from a friend of mine who was talking about how disappointed she was in the city and the administration. She didn't know a lot of this back information, but she just, from her perspective, and having worked with the city before trying to do community gardens, had a very similar experience. So she put a post out there, and of course, it got hundreds and hundreds of comments, people being very upset. So the mayor posted his own rebuttal of that from his own personal Facebook page into the Lake Stevens community. And that also got a whole bunch of chatter. And when I went through and read the chatter, it was like, "Oh, thank you so much for the transparency. Oh, this makes so much more sense. This person, me, isn't a nonprofit. So essentially, some of the effect was she shouldn't be making money. I do deserve to get paid for the work that I do. Everybody deserves to get paid for the work that they do. especially in these types of community things where everybody wants what they want and nobody really wants to volunteer to do it. So you've got to have somebody to do it, and that's me. And I love what I do, and I continue to love what I do. This just is another notch in the belt of people that I can piss off. So those threads went nuts, and I did jump into both of them and put the same formulated response that I worked very hard to keep professional on both of them because, again, I wasn't asked about my feedback on either of them. So those both live out there now, and I think the comments trickle in here and there, both sides very vocal. And what I'm here to really, really talk about and be transparent about is the fact that in many of our cities across the United States, it is an election year. These small, seemingly small positions for city council, for mayor, for judges are coming up for reelection. And there are incumbents and there are newcomers who think that they know better, and they might. And I think that there is a really great opportunity for change in some of our communities. I also want to reiterate that a Facebook post doesn't always tell the full story. Both my friend's post in the community group didn't have all the facts. The mayor's rebuttal didn't have all the facts. It's like going back to when we learned about statistics and graphing. You can make a graph look like anything that you want. And I started this podcast by saying that this is my experience and these are my facts. So there is inherent bias because it is my experience. But I just want people to be aware of how this affects communities and how, in general, in this day and age, with the administration, what it is, with the United States, the way it is, that there's so much happening on social media. But when it comes to actual action, so many people don't show up. They show up in the comment section, but they don't show up at the ballot boxes. They show up in the comment section, but they don't show up in city council meetings. And they also don't show up when people are asking for help and asking for these events to continue. They need volunteers. My husband ran for a political office a couple of years ago because the exhaustion of, continuing to advocate for change and these types of things just really ended up getting to him. He believed in listening to people, he believed in community. And I will say that year that he ran for office was one of the hardest years that I think we've ever been through. The attacks, the false narratives, the money machine behind some of the incumbents, specifically in the Lake Stevens race. It's the same pattern that I'm seeing now. Ordinary people are trying to make a difference, and we're trying to make our voices heard, and we want to see change just in general in our communities, and that really comes down to us as individuals and what we're willing to do, what we're willing to speak up for, and how we're willing to show up for the things that we actually do want in our communities outside of Facebook, social media, and the comment section. So obviously, I'm upset, I'm angry, I'm tired, I'm exhausted. This is exhausting to go through, and it's happening across the board with small businesses. I don't care what side of the aisle you on. I mean, I do care. I have my own beliefs and my own morals and my own values and the things that I'm going to stand up for and the people I'm going to support. But really, when it comes down to it, these things, farmers markets, community events, Klahaya days, car shows, Christmas parades, all of those different types of things do not need to be political division. They need to be community coming together to support the things that want to keep our small town small, our small communities active and having events and supporting small businesses. That's really what it comes down to. And so that's why I decided to sit down and make this podcast because we, as just individuals, the people that are in the hamster wheel, making the grind every single day, we deserve better than what we've been given. We deserve better by showing up and by having our voices heard and by not being scared to speak up when we see something is not happening as it should be. And everything is tight right now. Budgets are tight. Household income is tight. All of the prices are going up. And at the same time, some of these actions are completely free. You can show up in a comment section because it is free and it doesn't take a whole lot of time out of your day. Maybe you can show up for a few hours the next time you see a volunteer need. Maybe you can show up to the cold weather shelter. Maybe you can show up to the food bank. All of these ways you can get involved in your community are important. And the more you show up, the more you start to see through the cracks of what's really happening behind the scenes, and what you're being told may not always be the truth. So what I want to reiterate here is that the Lake Stevens Farmers Market may be gone, but the movement is just getting started and what we can do in our communities. And I think that, just a little politics thing here, we've got the opportunity to vote. It's free. You can go donate to a campaign that you feel strongly about. You can go knock on doors. You can wave signs for a candidate, also free. You can talk to your neighbors and you can have discussions that are difficult but necessary. And you can show up, because change doesn't happen in the comment section on social media. It happens at the ballot box and in what you do to engage in your community. Thanks for tuning in to the Market Maven podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe so you never miss a story. Your support keeps this podcast going. So if you'd like to help me continue sharing these inspiring journeys, consider contributing through my Venmo in the show notes. Every bit helps. Until next time, keep supporting small businesses and pursuing your very own passions.